This is Melissa, and it is the 12th of March, 2023. I did not know what direction to go with the Redux, the upload today, but I received an email on Friday from a listener in the American Northeast who wished me Happy International Bagpipes Day. I did not know that Friday was International Bagpipes Day. So instead of doing anything particularly productive, I just listened to a lot of bagpipe music. And that song was Scotland the Brave. This listener went on to write, I've listened to nearly all of Alan's talks, maybe 2 and 3 times over at this point. Just was listening to your last post on YouTube with Neil Foster. Anyways, I too found Alan through Alex Jones. I didn't understand Alan. I just knew he believed what he was saying. I had to keep listening over and over, but slowly I started to get the picture. Anishinaabemoan, or Ojibwemoan, the language of the Chippewa, would say Debwe, is how Alan speaks, to speak truthfully. Debwe is the correct spelling of Ojibwe. As a kid, I remember watching a Schoolhouse Rocks cartoon, Unpack Your Adjectives. You can even make adjectives out of the other parts of speech, like verbs or nouns. All you have to do is tack on an ending like ick or ish or airy. For example, this boy can grow up to be a huge man, but still have a boyish face. Boy is a noun, but the ending ish makes it an adjective. Boyish. That describes the huge man's face. Get it? When you realize that people don't look like what people used to look like 70 years ago when they reach adulthood, it's just absolutely astonishing. Like what you were saying about women's hips and men's shoulders, there's no denying it. The fact that no one notices hardly, and it's not a topic of conversation, is what's most frightening, because of how apparent that aspect of reality is. I wrote Alan once, quoting Jackson Browne, "People just go where they will, and I never noticed them until I got this feeling that it's later than it seems." I remember Alan saying that he knew our infrastructure was temporary because power lines should be underground. He said the next big thing in the trades wouldn't be construction but taking things down. As people thought we were gearing up for a one-world government, things would go the opposite direction, and we would have city-states with technology beyond your wildest dreams, with barbarians on the fringes. It's funny, too, how he said they would give land back to the natives, and I see that trend returning with the Truth and Reconciliation movement. It's strange to see so much of what he said take shape. Did you see how just this week they said that they were able to bring mice into the world using only XY mice, no XX? Alan didn't talk too much about spirituality. I heard him talking about our material bodies, the carbon stuff we are made out of, and the soul as what animates us. I think he said the purpose of the soul is to find your spirit, the one made for you by the Creator. What is the word? Golem is a kind of like a person who is lacking spirit. And golem is like column, like the letter I, in a different font with the lines on top and bottom. In school, I always capitalize I when referring to yourself, but really, the lowercase I is the one who sees. The day I found out Alan died, my dad, who has functional frontal temporal lobe dementia, called me up and was asking for help playing a bagpiping song on his phone. My dad is not the type that listens to bagpipes, and he never calls me up for hardly anything. I'll be forever grateful to Alan for everything that he did and for being a friend to so many. Then he sent me the lyrics to Scotland the Brave, and I'll read just a few of the lines. Hark when the night is falling, hear the pipes are calling, loudly and proudly calling down through the glen. There where the hills are sleeping, now feel the blood a-leaping, high as the spirits of the old Highland men. Towering and gallant fame, Scotland, my mountain hame. High may your proud standards gloriously wave, land of my high endeavor, land of the shining rivers, land of my heart forever, Scotland the brave. That hame, Scotland, my mountain hame. Hame is home, so Hamish is home-like, like feeling of home. I'm going to play a little clip from a woman who has listened to Alan for a long time, and it's nice what she shared because Alan's work had such an impact on her, and it impacted the way that she chose to raise her children. And that, I think, is what we have left, is hoping that those of us, those little eyes who can see things as they are able to pass this on to those around us.
Hello. I'm not comfortable sharing my real name, but I wanted to say a few words about Alan and the impact he has had on my life. I started listening to Alan in 2008, back when the internet was very different from what it is today. You could research something on Google and go down several rabbit holes, and one of them landed me on Alan's page. I found his work very different from what everyone else was doing, and there was a treasure trove of articles, transcripts, talks, and of course I was hooked. There was, so much truth without any agenda there. There was information there that no one at that time was sharing, and all of which was straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But it was a way that Alan presented the information and how he put it in context, using history, and how he read between the lines that put things into so much of it into perspective for me. So as such, I would say his works definitely have had a big impact on my life. I listened to the podcast daily, and as I worked that time for large bank at that time, I began to really pay attention to the little things that were rapidly changing, the technologies that were being implemented across the bank I worked at and several financial services firms to monitor and control transactions and a lot of other things. But, long story short, Alan Watt was a huge reason why I ultimately decided to stay home, homeschool my kids. I've never looked back since then, and so grateful for that. He got me started on the path of also staying away from a lot of unnecessary interventions, medically speaking. Most of all, I'm grateful to him for transcending the topics of left versus right, or, one race versus another. As he used to say, it's always been the big boys in the club versus everyone else, and that the elite have no country, no creed. And it's once you realize these simple truths, you begin to transcend so many of the issues that keep us divided and distracted. So, like I said, this was very different from what everyone else in the media and even the alternative media is always preaching, and with always making it about right versus left, conservative versus liberal, or one race versus another, etc. Not gonna lie, there were definitely times where I found myself depressed listening to Alan's truth, and there were times he flat out said there's no such thing as a grassroots revolution, how he infiltrated each and every institution, agencies, so that true change is extremely hard at an organizational level. And he did, however, always speak about the power of an individual and how, like, the state or the elite always fear the individual. And again, this was such a simple truth to me that that did bring some solace that there is something that, no one can take away from me. And I definitely feel Alan was a truly brilliant mind with his research, the sheer amount of work that he put into it, the original music, and even those few lines of verses or poetry he wrote introducing each podcast, and just being able to put everything in the right context. I was deeply saddened by his passing. I'm very happy that his works will not be forgotten, and that his podcast and website are still running. Thank you, Ellen, for dedicating your life to the truth.
Neil Foster recorded a little clip about Alan.
Hi, this is Neil Foster of the Irish Sentinel, Southern Independent back in the day, and Reality Bytes Radio. I don't know if this is going to be so much a tribute to Alan, but just my own memories of many, many hours talking to the man, and learning as time went on. I suppose starting at the beginning, I was living in the mountains in Bulgaria, and like many who finally woke up to the reality of the situation they were living in, the world they were living in, I was watching Alex Jones' InfoWars, and Alan came on as a guest, and I heard his Scottish accent. I thought, oh, there's a Scottish guy, let's hear what this guy's got to say. And from the first few minutes I was just gobsmacked by this man's knowledge. I started going looking for Alan's work, of which there was volumes and volumes of it, and he would always encourage people to go and download it for free, etc., which I did, and I started listening to his back catalogue, and really the knowledge that he had and the information he disseminated was incredible. And I don't think there really is anyone out there with that depth of history of this evil that we're living through. And many of the things he talked about have happened. Now, that's not a coincidence. That's a result of decades of research, pure and simple. You don't get that type of knowledge and that perspective of what's happening in the world without doing that. And he dedicated a large part of his life to that. The mountains of Bulgaria. So I spent many hours listening to Alan and just trying to get my head around all the things he was saying. Went and bought a load of books that he'd mentioned, and as he said, every time he mentioned them the price went up, so it was important you grabbed them while you could, or they very quickly seemed to disappear. But as time went on, I can't remember if we did radio first or we did the event in Dublin first, I can't remember, but we ran a conference in Dublin under the Southern Independent banner, and we asked Alan to do a video for us, which he kindly did, I think 45 minutes to an hour, and we played that right at the start of that conference. And you get the stragglers coming in and all the rest, but everybody who sat down watched that and was riveted by it. And it still surprises me today, even when you talk to people in the so-called truth movement, of which it's very, very hard to find truth, and I don't really see much movement in it. But even today, when you talk to people who believe that they're awake, they know what's going on, have you heard of Alan Watt? No. And that still shocks me today, that the people who are supposed to be aware aren't aware of Alan's work. Or of course many of them still think that Trump is going to come back and save them, so that's how shallow down the rabbit hole they are, I guess. But the radio, I think I tried to count them up, but I think there was 26 interviews that I call them, they're not interviews really, they're just actually discussions Alan and I had, and we covered various topics, and Alan would always have an answer. He would always have an answer to your question, and he would do his best to in intricate detail. he would explain what you thought was a simple question, and he'd go off on this tangent, and another tangent, and take you deeper and deeper into the answer, which was incredible. But in terms of my perspective as the, in inverted commas, interviewer, I just sat with the headphones on and listened. There was no point. I obviously interrupted sometimes just to clarify something, or to maybe take it off on another tangent, but it was great to just let them speak, and for people to listen. As I always say to my guests, it's people haven't come here to listen to me; they've come here to listen to the guests. So, take it away. The other thing about Alan, people say, "Oh, doom and gloom," when in fact, reality, unfortunately, these days particularly, is doom and gloom, because there doesn't seem to be any way out of this at the moment. Maybe that'll change, maybe it won't, and we just have to ride it out and see what happens down the line a bit. But Alan would call you up out of the blue, 7, 8 o'clock at night or something, and before you knew it, it was 10:30, 11 o'clock. You'd been on the phone for 2-3 hours at times, and just the conversation would just flow and flow and flow and flow. And some of those would have made great radio as well. But there was a lot of laughter in it as well. There was a lot of dark humour about the situation, and would laugh and chat. And I wasn't the only one he called up. I know there were other people he did this to as well. And he would give you his time. He would just give you his time, and it was kind of therapeutic, if you like. A lot of people say Alan kept them sane. Well, I think I can say that about myself as well, in many respects, because he was a voice of rationality in all of us. And he always said he wasn't a guru, he wasn't here to save the world or anything. He was just here to give you the information, and it was up to you to do what you wanted with it, and to examine it, verify it. And he was very, very meticulous with his information, to the point where everything he talked about was linked. Everything. And there would be even other links in there which would relate to the subject, which he hadn't even mentioned. But there was in-depth bibliography for every talk he did. And, my biggest regret, I guess, is that I never actually met him. My wife and I did discuss going up to Canada. Never actually mentioned it to Alan, but I don't think. But that never transpired. So, as I say, that's the regret I've got. But as to the time spent talking to the man, I can't say a bad word about any of it. He was a library of knowledge. I mean, you couldn't, as I say, I don't think there's anybody that has that kind of depth of knowledge, or had that depth of knowledge in the so-called truth movement. And certainly a lot of people didn't even want to go down that way. It was all very superficial for many people. I should just finish off by saying I wouldn't even be doing this recording right now if it wasn't for Alan, because he didn't actively encourage me to get on radio, but he made me believe in my own mind that I could do it, that I could just go on, look at articles, read them out, and I do it in a kind of amateurish way. But I've not done it for a while. I've not done it for over a year now, and I really should get back into it, because I feel I'm doing nothing. But yeah, maybe I'll use this reminiscing about Alan to encourage me to do it again. I don't know what else to say, really. I miss you, Alan. I miss you. Your knowledge is still there, of course, and Melissa is doing a great job keeping your memory alive with the recordings she's putting out week on week. And again, if you listen to those, anybody who hears this and hasn't heard of Alan Watt, I encourage you to go there and listen to download the archives, listen to them from way, way back, and you'll see that here's a man who knew what he's talking about. I guess that's all I can say. Thanks to Melissa for allowing me to do this, or for asking me to do this. As I say, not so much a tribute, just a collection of short memories, and there are many more, but I've got to keep this short. Thank you.
So when I was thinking of which of Alan's talks I wanted to excerpt from, I decided, well, why not do Neil and Alan talking together on Reality Bytes Radio? And this is from September 10, 2015. It's a good show. The entire hour or so is worth listening to. They get into how cultures are portrayed, how cultures are demonized when your masters want you to go to war on their behalf, how cultures are also mythologized. Say, for example, the American West. We're just given enough education, whatever period of history that we live in, we're just given enough education to do the work that is required of us. And I think one of the things that can be a little overwhelming, especially without Alan's weekly regular voice saying, okay, this is what you're hearing on the news, and I'll break it down for you and analyze it, and you'll perhaps see it in a different way. And without his voice on a regular basis, it's very easy to get a little lost or overwhelmed. And I was thinking this afternoon that if you try to follow, for instance, Ukraine, or you try to follow the scamdemic or the vaccine fallout or what the World Economic Forum is up to, you've got some choices here. And I think this is true of anybody, whether they're waking up, whether they're conscious of what's happening, or they're just blithely going through life, is that you can be an expert or you can be a generalist. And the expert is going to say, and I'm not talking about those experts, but those of us who might decide, well, what I'm going to concentrate on is I'm going to stay with COVID. I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to get into the vaccine. I'm going to go down whatever tunnel that takes me, but that's my expertise. Or you try to be a generalist and just follow everything that's coming at you 90 miles an hour. And I find actually for myself that either approach is not possible. I don't have time to be a generalist, and it just seems myopic in the face of what is really happening to try to be an expert on any one subject. So I always return to Alan's talks. Old ones, it doesn't matter how far back they go, it just kind of helps put things in perspective. And this morning I was looking at a few pages from the Cutting Through books, and Alan was writing in there about Masonry and how the brotherhoods are used in the priestly orders and the military orders. He gets into the deviancy behind it. And I liked what he had to say about war. He said, the war is always on the people. Fear is always used. But, throughout, like the Cold War, for instance, the real purpose of that was compliance and obedience and keeping people in a state of constant fear. And there are some, I'll turn on any news outlet to see what's going on, for instance, how they're covering Ukraine. And today I was listening to a little bit of coverage from all different sources. And I was struck by several things. I mean, I was actually, what you might say, gobsmacked when I heard two different news outlets describe the situation as in Ukraine as gaining inches and losing thousands. Now, one of the newscasts that I listened to said that neither side, Russia nor Ukraine, is giving a death count. They're not saying what their losses are. But these newscasters are convinced that it's, many thousands on a weekly, daily basis, whatever. This is like the war of attrition. But yet again, two different sites compared what is happening there to these great conflicts of the last century. And both of them said it's like Stalingrad or Verdun. It's a meat grinder there. And I was thinking war of attrition. If we could believe anything, then they would just be willing to throw the little guy, the soldier on the ground, into the trench or into the field or into whatever forever, because they'll keep this going as long as they want to. This is about billions and billions and billions of dollars going into who knows whose pocket, but it's the military-industrial complex. And the other really interesting piece of news that I heard in the war coverage was I learned that this week was not only International Bagpipes Day, but it was International Women's Day. And because of that, one of the female news anchors was talking to a Ukrainian minister, politician, a female MP. And she was saying, talk about how women are being helped and promoted and cared for during this war. And the minister was talking about all of the different programs that they had in place and how people couldn't forget the women, and this was so important, and the women were so impacted by the war and so forth. But then they really got to the meat of what this whole segment was about. Because this minister just recently put forth a bill in the Ukrainian parliament for the legalization, I guess, or acknowledgement or codification somehow of dealing with same-sex unions. And she said this is so important because, of course, these people are also involved in the war. And if one of them loses a partner or the partner is injured and has to go to the hospital, they have no legal rights. But they just kept talking about how important this was, and she hoped that it would pass. And she said the majority of the Ukrainian people are behind this. 56% of the Ukrainian people would like to see same-sex unions legalized and helped. I thought, well, that is really what these so-called wars are always about. It's about all of the other cultural changes that can be rammed through while those at the top are raking in the billions on their arms deals. And Alan and Neil are going to talk about war and culture change, and so I will leave you to listen to that.
Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 10th of September 2015, and delighted to welcome back Alan Watt to the show. You there, Alan?
Yeah, I'm here, yep.
Yep, loud and clear. Okay, I wrote a short email to you as usual, and it was concerning how today's society perceives old society and old cultures, and I wondered if the TV and the movies are trying to portray certain cultures in a certain way, so as people can say, well, they deserve it. That's what they're like, you know. They're they're savages, or they're backwards peoples, or whatever. I mean, I suppose I was watching Vikings, and in that they're just totally portrayed as brutal savages. Every one of them's a psychopath. I mean, there was one scene where the guy just gets up and chops somebody's legs off just because he's sitting the wrong way, and things like that. And I was thinking about Greece and how that's kind of transpired, and whether these types of societies, as they were in ancient times, they're kind of warrior peoples, are being kind of goaded into reverting back to the way they were. You see some of the riots in Greece, and they've got dustbin lids, trash can lids, and batons. And if you saw them from a distance, you'd think they were ancient warriors with a shield and a sword. In terms of the way society is portraying them now, it seems to be making these people out right across the board. It doesn't matter what historical drama you watch. The ordinary people are savages, basically.
Yes. Yeah. There's no doubt about it that the whole world, through the same international educational system and its various formats of indoctrinations, have been dumbing everybody down across the planet since the days of John Dewey, where they talked about bringing in a rather kind of peasant-type society so that the elite could dominate and run the world what they called properly by experts and so on. Has been going on for an awful long time, and you're seeing that this portrayal, always again through fictional movies and so on, as they try to debase different cultures down to some low common denominator of primitive peasantry that needs expert rule, you see. And lots of folk who watch this stuff their whole life long will adopt those particular viewpoints as well on the cultures. I've heard people even in Scotland saying, oh yeah, there's too many people, and yeah, blah, 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 which is utter trite, because the population of Scotland really was around 5 million at that time. And if you want a minority group, there's the Scots, and now they're almost gone altogether with the massive influx of European immigrants and African immigrants and so on. And so everything you see on TV and movies really is really it's lies, basically. It's propaganda, and it's really preparation and indoctrination as well, getting you ready for some other type of system being brought in. So, but as I say, the average person who watches TV all their life will actually adopt the opinions that are given to them, and take the elite's point of view, even though they're basically working class people. I've heard out their mouths too. Yeah.
In terms of that, I mean, I've never seen one of these kind of sword and sandal movies of old, and recent series or recent movies on the Romans being classed as barbarians. I've never seen one yet. They're always classed as the pinnacle of civilization, which fell apart because people got greedy and the too much sex and all the rest of it. But they're always portrayed as these noble warriors who went off and conquered places. I mean, it doesn't say they went off and slaughtered everybody.
Yeah, that's standard again, and for again in the European history books. Which again caters. Remember, education for ordinary folk was a much later development, really for the industrial era, because they had to get basic reading and writing and basic arithmetic and so on, so as that people could work in the factories and sort of work and manage the factories. If it wasn't for that, probably they would never have given you basic education unless your parents could afford to bring in a private teacher or something. That's how Robert Burns was taught, But basically, they never wanted the people at the bottom to get any education at all. And once they did give them education, in Europe and in Britain especially, at least Britain wrote about it, they had big meetings of the nobility and the aristocracy, worrying about taking down or reducing the work hours from 16 or 17 hours per day in the factories down to and giving them a couple of hours extra for themselves, and the kind of mischief they might get up to if they started chatting to themselves, which could be compounded with problems for the elite's rule if you also gave them a basic education where they could actually transmit what they'd read about life, history and so on, and societies, and they might eventually rebel. So there's a tremendous problem right up into the 1900s about this particular problem of giving basic education to the peasants, and that's how they framed it, basically, the commoners, and what effect it would have on a stable society. That's never really changed. And then you've got the other groups too, the communist groups, elements that came in as well, which really worked towards the same goal of expert rule by an intelligentsia, run in a scientific fashion for society. So it's the same agenda that's gone together. These two roads really merge into one with the same goals, and that's why you see it all working out today on all sides and all parties.
I suppose in America we've got the native Indians, as it were, portrayed as well, and uneducated, illiterate. But of course they had their own language. Just because they didn't speak English doesn't mean they're illiterate, you know. That's
right. And also too, the problem again across Europe was it was standard for those who could afford education in universities and so on, but most folk could not. It was always an elitist thing. Was to be taught what they call classic history, which was based on Roman and Greek history. And they taught the Latin, they taught the Greek, in fact, right up into the year about the World War I, and most of these upper schools. And that's what they based their model of what civilization was. It was from the days of ancient Greece and so on. In fact, Asia and that they weren't mentioned at all in those teachings. And it was all Greek and Roman who brought civilization, especially the Roman part that took over from Greece, by conquering to unify what then was the ancient world. And that goal was always present amongst certain classes in the upper strata, of bringing in a world order again, you know, based on kind of Roman type order as well. And they always said that they went to civilize the world, didn't go to plunder it and to spread its tax base and so on, and resources. And it was always to bring civilization. And you'll find with the empirical ages of the colonizers of Europe, different countries, they had the same format, they used the same excuses. They never told you that the big merchant bankers were running the countries already and using your armies to go and plunder so that they and their own boys could get in there and get all the goods and raw resources and all the rest of it. So there's a tremendous hypocrisy in history, which is always covered in lies, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going back to when I was a child, we always watched the latest Western movies and all the rest of it. And again, even the kind of the shopkeepers in the little towns there were semi-illiterate themselves, and there was always kind of the head guy in the town, whether it was a sheriff or somebody else, some corporate entity, was always there to denigrate everybody and say that we need to do this, we need to do that, and you just mind your place, kind of thing. And that was always how it was portrayed in the movies. And again later on, when the Indians were portrayed as alcoholics, savages. They were the ones doing all the scalping, and they deserved what was coming to them, which was, as you say, civilization. And that's what was portrayed. And if we bring it back into what's happening today in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, we see the same thing. This same game plan. Dehumanize the people that live there, even although you don't know who they are. You've never met them. You know nothing about them until you're told that they were, terrorists. And away you go.
Yeah, it's an old strategy again, very old strategy. But you always demonize the enemy regardless, and the Romans did the same thing until they had them, quote, civilized, and brought into the Roman Empire. Then they'd lift them up a bit to the extent in their history books. But, you always call them barbarian, etc., even though the Romans themselves were very paganistic, had their own kinds of sacrifices too, and including sacrificing their own troops for king for the day and all that, for the Mars celebration. So it's amazing how the hypocrisy involved with those who get paid, the mercenaries who go off to get paid to civilize other countries for the big merchant bankers of the day. And ancient Rome had the same problem. Ancient Rome was run really It doesn't matter who was the figurehead in power, he was dependent upon the loans that he got too to manage his big empire and the massive armies and all the rest of it. There's a lot of history involved in that. And even had the merchant bankers, workers going off with the armies, and they managed all the payments, the weekly or monthly payments to the troops. They managed all the logistical supplies and all the rest of it, and it all went down and carefully written down all the rest of what was owed. And the Caesar, whoever happened to be, the emperor would go off and he'd meet with the lenders of the day. You know. So nothing's really changed from then to the present time.
So when say people in Scandinavia watch a program like Vikings, they must have a better idea of their own history than the TV portrays. But do you think they actually take on some of the characteristics, or try to live up to those kind of characteristics that are portrayed on the television in the modern era?
The one country in the world where you'll see it emulated to an extent. I mean, remember, the whole culture idea is also fashion. It's fashion, music, and the whole culture industry, and the movies. And you'll see it's more prominent in the US, who actually, you'll see the whole during the 70s, it churned out these different Dukes of Hazzard and all these different things. The guys with the tailor-made jeans, where their genitals were so crushed that you could almost think that that's what their Adam's apple happened to be. The tight pants, the tight shirt, and the big hats and all that, acting like cowboys with big V8 engine cars and running moonshine. That's the image that was portrayed. We're free and we're wild and watches sort of idea. And so many Americans actually thought that all their ancestors were cowboys, which is nonsense, utter rubbish, because factory towns were taken from Europe by the same boys who ran them in Europe, and they set them up across the US, brought the immigrants in, shoved them into different mining towns and so on, factory towns, gave them the tokens. The guy who owned it had his own tokens for money, and you couldn't leave the damn place because you couldn't exchange them for dollars. You were stuck there. That didn't really change till World War I, So, but they don't know that. Their history's been given through Hollywood, and as I say, through Hollywood, they all think they were free and wild and can make their own destinies and all the rest of it. It's utter rubbish. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention the hazard. I mean, I've actually seen some of those types of cars around here, the same paint jobs and everything, and presumably the same types of people driving them.
Mm-hmm. Or they wannabes, yeah. The wannabes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly that culture here, that fast car culture, kind of drive like a maniac. I mean, we hear sirens down on the big highway down here, and there's a lot of accidents around here on the interstates and stuff. And it's just atrocious driving. They drive like they're in a movie, and it's no wonder. It's no wonder
they're trying to live a fantasy that never really was, But what's true too. I mean, most ordinary people, and sociology proves it, and anthropology and all the rest of it, if you really study into it, most folk who lived in the rural areas in any country had to get on together pretty well for survival, purposes. You couldn't have the kind of real Wild West, as it's often portrayed, exciting and gunslingers and all the rest of it. You couldn't really have that because there'd be chaos, and those who could make things work would all leave to go somewhere else. So it's the same in ancient Rome too. The peasantry did the real work. They provided all your food and everything else, and they had their own customs and all the rest of it, which were kind of foreign to the elites, and they were pretty well a true well-formed society. You'll find the same thing in most countries too. They didn't think about going off to war, and it's always the elite who want to go off to war to conquer and gain more and become more prosperous themselves for their own survival and progeny becoming wealthy down through time. That's never changed to the present day. But so the ordinary folk in every country have always managed to get on pretty well together. If you look at the history, often it's given, and through again fiction, of Scotland, for instance, you'd think that the clans were always slaughtering each other, which wasn't true at all, And there was lots of intermarriage between the clans. It went on all the time. And and lots of cooperation as well. And they certainly had their own boundaries to an extent, but you didn't get slaughtered if you stepped over that imaginary line. Whereas again, because England came over and dominated Scotland, and even when I say England, I also mean the Normans. You know, they kind of slipped in quietly into Scotland. You didn't have the big massive battles that they did in England, but suddenly you had these lords would appear in Scotland, and they were really Norman extract, etc., and related to the ones who dominated England. And they changed the histories and made you, once again, made it seem like before they came, there's nothing but barbarism everywhere. Utter nonsense. Scotland even was, ancient Romans used to send their elite children off to the universities in Scotland in ancient times. And most folk have no idea that even happened. They even had ones in Ireland, ancient Ireland, well documented too. By the Romans and the Greeks as well. So there was an ancient culture that certainly was not, barefooted and all the rest of it, just managing the cows. There was definitely an educated class of the Celtic peoples. Yeah.
Taking that as a fact, in terms of Hadrian's Wall, I mean, was that just a myth to make out that the Scots were just all savages?
Oh, wasn't that? In other words, savages. They were defending their country from invasion, and Rome. Every country they went to invade at won, except Scotland. That's the only country they couldn't conquer. And they went up. There was Antonine as well, and Hadrian. But the 9th Legion was sent up into Scotland. And Rome was in shock when it was found out that not one single one of them returned, and they couldn't find a trace of them. And then they sent the 13th Legion in, and the same thing happened to them as well. And that's what made them build the wall. They realized they couldn't conquer these people. They were so fiercely defended their country, they wouldn't let it go. And they're very proud people. And they love their country. Scots have a great love of the land they're born on. You know, it's just incredible. And why would you hand it over to a bunch of folk who are going to turn you into slaves, you know? Yeah, that's what they'd like you to think, a bunch of hairy guys, you know, with clubs. Utter nonsense. And as I say, that they had thriving ancient cities in places across Scotland too. And England as well, mind you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, like, we're portrayed as savages, but obviously we're, as you say, just defending the country and defending it pretty well by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, the culture creation industry starts to portray Scotland as losers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
right, I mean, from then, we can't run our own country. We're not good enough to run our own country. Blah blah blah. All this kind of stuff. Our soccer team's rubbish. You know, all that stuff. And,
Yeah.
It's just kind of. I found it in Scottish people. Maybe some of the lesser educated, shall we say, saying, "Oh well, that's just Scottish for you. That's just the way we are. We're always going to be second. We're always going to be useless." Mm-hmm. And I find that's a mindset that seems to be, kind of growing. If anything, this whole independence stuff is just farcical. Mm-hmm. When people seem to have this defeatist attitude about everything.
Yeah. So what you have is a deculturalization process. And there's actually, I mean, even from the Romans up to the present time, there's techniques of, and they're using it, by the way, in the Middle East, in Iraq and so on. They sent anthropologists in with all the troops, to find ways to work with the people there, but you start deculturalizing the people to lose their culture, lose their patriotism, lose the love of themselves, each other, and their country. That's standard as you knock a country down. Ireland and Scotland literally had English language forced upon them by law, And at certain times in Scottish history, if you spoke Gaelic, you were hung on the spot. After Culloden that happened too. And you couldn't even wear your tartan eventually. That was your tribals. It was a nice damned outfit, You couldn't wear that either. That was your attachment to all your ancestors and your whole history before you. That was all written in the codes of the tartan of your clan. You were forbidden to wear that too, or they'd kill you, with one exception. And the exception was, you could speak Gaelic and you'd wear the tartan if you fought for the English army abroad. That's how they won Canada, you know. It was the Fraser Highlanders, after Culloden, they brought over. They faced either getting slaughtered or fighting for the English, and they won the Heights at Quebec, you know. So under Wolfe. So that's all they've done ever since, has been the shock troops for the British Empire. You know. So we've been deculturalized totally. Your history's been almost eradicated. You've been made to feel a second-class citizen. If you had a Scottish accent, you were definitely way down the rung on the class scale, as far as those in London were concerned. When you opened your mouth, didn't matter what your IQ was, if you opened your mouth, your accent would immediately categorize you in a certain class, and you were not deemed to get above it, you know. That's factual history, yeah.
So off they go, and they land in Wessex, and the English there don't speak English. They're speaking their own language. Northumbria has a different language, and nobody in England speaks English at that time.
That's right.
And all different dialects. When did that start changing?
Well, for a long time you had the Danelaw, remember, and the Danes really ran a good part of England for one time. Even before that, you had the Lords of the Isles that lived in the west coast of Scotland, who literally were part of the whole pre-Viking group. We don't realize the whole of Scandinavia and Scotland were attached in really ancient times, going into what was called prehistory. And they had often the Lord of the Isles, who lived in the west coast of Scotland, in a castle there, were also ruled a good part of England. All the way down through Northumbria was part of Scotland for a long time. It was given away in marriage eventually of royalties. But they were also the rulers of the Scandinavia as well. And it was quite acceptable from the Scandinavians' point of view that those people and those who were in Scotland were the same people to an extent, you know. To a good extent. So there's no nasty feelings about it. And sometimes ones in Scandinavia would rule a good parts of Scotland and Ireland as well. They're all related, you know. So, again, there's a long prehistory that goes into the history up until the early Catholic times. And again, the Catholicism as well tried to eradicate a lot of that as well. Yeah, the history. So, you always deculturalize by eradicating history. People don't even know that Scotland had a naval fleet. In fact, they sunk a Roman fleet off the east coast of Scotland. You know.
Well, another thing that was portrayed in the Vikings thing was that I think it was Wessex and Northumbria came to an agreement with the Vikings that they would give them some land if they helped them as mercenaries to conquer Mercia. I don't know how true that is, but were the Vikings used as mercenaries in England?
Not so much really as the way it's portrayed, no. As I say, a lot of the Danes had settled in part of Wessex and so on, in parts of England. And they had the Danelaw there up until King Harold, you know, his days, and then they were conquered with the Normans, etc. And the Normans really changed the whole face of everything and kind of rewrote the history as well. There's no doubt that certain clan chiefs in the Norwegian side would also hire occasionally men either to a cousin somewhere over in, say, in Scotland or Ireland. And that's always been the way too. It's not so much mercenaries. Well, your tribe would go off and fight for your cousin or whatever in different countries. That was their form of mercenary, I suppose. Scotland did it once in a while too. And in fact, it's even towards the north of Italy today, you still get certain red-headed Italians on the north of Italy, because a tribe, one clan was sent over there to fight in a war, and they never got back, and for a long time they spoke Gaelic, and a lot of them still have Scottish surnames. So they were widely they were world travellers. We don't understand that. They were world travellers in those days, and they didn't they didn't see the world as one tiny little localized place. They saw it to be explored, and they were really early explorers as well. So a lot of trade too came through Scotland and Ireland as well from different countries. From ancient times as well, right up and again to the Normans came, and the Normans changed everything, including the versions of history. Lots of the history was burned in massive piles, basically, to eradicate the past. You always eradicate the past to dominate a people. And after a generation or two of indoctrination of the first generation, if you indoctrinate your first generation, they indoctrinate the children for you. And then you end up with this kind of vague nothingness of what the past was for you, where when everybody around you, or the one who's conquered and rules you, like London, for instance, dominates the world during an empire era. Whereas you yourselves have nothing to look back on except eating haggis, and stuff like that. That's all you're left with. It's a joke.
Yeah, I do remember, like many years ago, wondering what it was to be Scottish anymore, because I couldn't see anything in Scotland that was Scottish anymore. Yeah. It was just this amalgamation of English cultures or things, and it was all kind of intermingled. There was no discerning thing. I mean, you had these guys standing on street corners with bagpipes, collecting money, and that was it. I just thought, there's your culture just sold for a 10p. Somebody throws it in a box, and I couldn't discern what it actually meant to be Scottish anymore.
Yeah, that was deliberate, absolutely deliberate, and it's very successful. It went on for such a long, long time, because we were put into a colony of London, really. London ruled. I don't even distinguish London. I do distinguish London from England, because they gave it, even the whole of England, a completely different culture as well. There's different groups across, like Yorkshire and so on, that really were separate tribal peoples, very proud and separate from the rest, and eventually they went under as well. So it didn't just happen in Scotland. It was a uniformity that was created by a conquering army.
Oh, I suppose right up to the modern time, with the amount of mass immigration that's happened in England, that's gone completely now. Yeah. I think people in the south of England particularly must feel totally alienated at this point, and have no concept of what growing up in an English society would be, because that simply doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't, no.
That was Clanadonia. They started as a pipe and drum street band in Glasgow. And you can understand when you listen to pipe and drum music why this brings out the fighting spirit, and how it can so easily be used to rouse people up to fight the enemy, whoever the enemy is. So when I was looking into bagpipes and the history of them and the International Bagpipe Organization, and I learned that possibly bagpipes go back to 400 BC, and they started in Egypt, or maybe they go back to 1000 BC. It depends on where you look, what you'll hear. But the basic idea of a bagpipe is the bag is often made, or was often made, with the skin of a sheep or a goat or whatever animal, I guess, was in your area. And then the pipes are carved out of wood. And lots of countries have them. I mean, of course, you often think of Scotland or even Ireland, but many countries love their pipe music. Bulgaria is one, and Turkey. I listen to some great Turkish pipe music, and the Egyptians have their great pipe music, and the Swedish have lovely pipes and lovely sound. So there are many parts of the world where this is kind of tied to the people, their identity, their land, and that was one of the things that Alan and Neil were talking about. And, I think that we heard Neil say the other day that, he had found the Scottish to be apathetic, and we discussed how the fight had kind of been knocked out of them over the years. Alan made the point there in this clip that I just played when he was talking to Neil that the Scottish people, but all people really, have traditionally been tied to their land. They love their land, and I think that the land, the hills where you walk, the sky that you look up to, your little piece, your little part of the world, is so much of where your identity comes from, and that comes before the colors of your flag, or it's just it's the essence of who we are. But it's so easily used when they want to use it against us. And I think if you start to really study music and listen to the words of music, like Scotland the Brave, the words to that song were written in the 50s, at least the words that, we hear today. And it conjures up this mythical Scotland. And it's become a kind of an unofficial national anthem. And so much of the music that we listen to across the world is the music that gets us going, is the music that is used for war. And one of the little trivia pieces that I came across was that in World War I, the Scottish regiments, they had a lot of pipers, and they sent the pipers off into war, but because the pipers were so easily identifiable, like their location could be pinpointed, they lost 1,000 bagpipers during World War I. War of attrition, even the musicians have to go. And that made me think about music in general and the way that it is used and what things symbolize, like the flower, the poppies, the poppies on Flanders Field, Pete Seeger's song, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? I think he said that he was inspired by a piece of Bulgarian folk music, or maybe it was Ukrainian folk music. I think it was Ukrainian. When he wrote that in 1955, but where have all the flowers gone? That's like the flower of Scotland. The flower comes from the seed. That's your men. They have flowered into manhood and to adulthood. And nothing was more tragic than what happened in Europe with a whole generation of men lost to somebody else's war. And if you go anywhere in Europe, it's a little bit different in the States or in Canada, but they have the cenotaphs and the town square of any town, large or small, with the listing of the dead who died in the wars. And it's kind of heartbreaking because who knows the direction that cultures would go if the flowers had not been taken from the field. And another total piece of trivia here, Roddy Piper, I guess he got his name because he had become proficient in playing the bagpipes. And the entrance music that he used when he went into the wrestling ring was Scotland the Brave. Roddy Piper from the wonderful movie that everybody needs to see called They Live. You can just put on the sunglasses and you can see that the elite are aliens and they want us to consume and breed and obey. And I think that if we put on the sunglasses at this time, we see that the elite, they may have a little bit different objective for us. And right now, the sunglasses say, die. So this is The Flower of Scotland by the Corries, the wonderful folk singers, the Corries. And I can't help but think of Alan when I hear this song.
O flower of Scotland, will we see your likes again, that fought and died for your way hill and glen, and stood against him? Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward. They think again. The hills are bare now, autumn leaves lie vacant still. O'er land that's been lost now, which those so dearly held had stood against him. Proud Edward's army, and sent him homeward. They think again. O flower of Scotland, will we see your likes again, that fought and died for your way bet hill and glen, and stood against him? Proud Edward's army, and sent him home.